Grace Whitfield's hands were shaking so hard she almost dropped the phone. She stood frozen in the doorway of a cabin that wasn't hers, staring at a man who was supposed to be dead. Rain hammered the tin roof above her. Her breath came out in short, broken clouds. The man turned around slowly, and when the porch light caught his face, Grace's knees buckled. It was him, scar and all. "Nathan?" she whispered, and the name cracked in half on her tongue. Before you find out what happens next, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. Trust me, you are not ready for where this story goes. Now, let's rewind, back to where it all began. 3 years earlier, Grace was a different woman. She believed with her whole chest that God did not make mistakes. She believed patience was a kind of prayer, and that the right man would come when he decided the timing was right, not a day before. She worked in her aunt's flower shop on the north side of Chicago, wrapping bouquets for funerals and weddings and every ordinary Tuesday in between. She was 27. Most of her friends were already married, already posting baby pictures, already asking her, gently, if she was doing okay being alone. She always smiled and said the same thing. "I'm not alone. I'm just waiting on God's timing." She meant it. Most days, she meant it. Then, Nathan Cole walked into the shop on a Thursday afternoon in October, asking for white lilies for his mother's grave, and Grace felt something shift in her chest that she hadn't felt in years. He was polite, careful with his words. He thanked her twice for the flowers, and once more on his way out the door. 3 days later, he came back for more lilies, even though his mother's birthday had already passed. Grace noticed. She didn't say anything, but she noticed. By December, they were having coffee after her shifts. By February, he was driving 2 hours every weekend just to sit across from her at her aunt's kitchen table and listen to her talk about her faith like it was the most fascinating thing he'd ever heard. "You really believe all of it," he said one night, not as a question. "I really do," Grace said. "God doesn't waste pain. Everything that's happened to me, all the waiting, all the disappointment, I believe it was leading me here, to this moment, maybe to you." Nathan looked at her for a long time before he answered, "I hope I don't let you down." She laughed it off. She thought it was sweet, a man being humble, a man aware of his own shortcomings. She didn't know yet that it was a warning. If you've ever ignored a warning because you loved someone too much to hear it, comment below with just one word: ignored. You'll want to remember that word, because Grace is about to learn exactly what it costs. They married the following spring, in a small church with folding chairs and paper fans, because Nathan said he didn't want a big wedding, didn't want people watching him, and didn't want the attention. Grace thought it was humility. She didn't think to ask what he might be hiding from. Their first year of marriage was, by every outward measure, good. Nathan worked long hours at a logistics company downtown. Grace kept working at the flower shop, and in the evenings they'd sit together on their small apartment balcony and pray before dinner, hands linked, heads bowed. But there were cracks, small ones, the kind you only notice in hindsight. Whenever Grace brought up their savings, Nathan changed the subject. "We're fine, baby. Don't worry about the money. That's my job to worry about." Whenever his cousin Dean called, Nathan would step outside to take it, even in the rain, even in the middle of dinner. "Who is that?" Grace asked one night, watching him through the window as he paced the parking lot below, phone pressed hard against his ear. "Just Dean being Dean," Nathan said when he came back inside, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "He gets himself into messes. I help him out sometimes." "What kind of messes?" "Nothing you need to worry about." Grace let it go. She always let it go. She told herself that trust was a form of love, that pressing him for answers would only push him away, that a good wife gave her husband room to breathe. She didn't know that room was where the lies were growing. There was a night, early in their second year, when Grace woke up at 2 a.m. to an empty bed. She found Nathan in the kitchen, laptop open, phone pressed to his ear, voice low and urgent. "I told you, I'm handling it," he was saying. "You don't call me at this hour, Dean. Not ever. Not at this number." Grace stood in the hallway, unseen, her arms wrapped around herself against the chill of the tile floor. "Nathan?" He startled so hard the laptop nearly slid off the counter. "Grace, hey, you're up." "Who are you talking to?" "Dean," he said, closing the laptop a little too quickly. "He's having some trouble with a business thing. I told you, he gets himself into messes."
At 2 in the morning? Some people don't respect other people's sleep. He crossed the kitchen and kissed her forehead, and she let him, even as some small, quiet part of her filed the moment away like evidence in a case she wasn't yet ready to build. "You tell me," she said, "if something was really wrong, wouldn't you?" "Baby, nothing is wrong," Nathan said, and he said it so smoothly, so gently, that she believed him completely. "I just don't want to burden you with Dean's mess. That's all this is." She went back to bed. She prayed for Dean, whoever he really was to Nathan, and she prayed for her marriage, and she never once thought to pray for herself, because she still believed, at that point, that she was the one being protected. She would think about that night for years afterward. She would replay it constantly, turning it over like a stone in her palm, wondering what might have changed if she had pushed harder, if she had demanded the laptop, the truth, anything at all, instead of a kiss on the forehead and a lie disguised as tenderness. 6 months into their second year, Grace found out she was pregnant. She cried when she saw the test, cried harder when she told Nathan, and for one golden week, everything felt like it was finally coming together. Nathan held her at night with his hand resting flat against her stomach, like he was trying to memorize the shape of what was coming. "I'm going to be a good father," he told her, "better than mine ever was to me." "I know you will," Grace whispered. She had no idea that a week later, everything would fall apart. Stick around, because what happens next is the moment this whole story turns, and I promise you, you will not see it coming. If this is your first time watching one of these, go ahead and hit subscribe right now so you don't miss a second of it. It was a Tuesday night in November when Nathan didn't come home. Grace called him 4 times. No answer. She called Dean. No answer. By 10 o'clock, she was pacing the apartment, Bible open on the kitchen table to a psalm she couldn't focus on, phone gripped so tight her knuckles had gone white. At 11:47 p.m., there was a knock at the door. It was Nathan, bleeding from a gash above his eyebrow, his shirt torn at the collar, his eyes wild and unfocused. "Nathan, oh my God, what happened to you?" "I got jumped," he said, stumbling past her into the apartment. 2 guys, downtown. They took my wallet, my watch, everything. Grace pressed a towel to his forehead with trembling hands, murmuring prayers under her breath as she worked. Nathan flinched away from her touch more than once, and later she'd remember that flinch and wonder what it meant. At the time, she thought it was pain. Later, she'd understand it was guilt. "We need to call the police," she said. "I already did," Nathan said quickly. Too quickly. "They're on it. Please, Grace, I just want to sleep. I'll deal with it in the morning." She let him sleep. She sat up beside the bed for hours, watching his chest rise and fall, praying over him the way she'd been taught to pray over the people she loved. She had no idea it was the last time she'd ever pray over him as her husband. 3 days later, 2 police officers stood on her doorstep with their hats in their hands, and Grace knew before they said a single word. "Mrs. Cole, we're very sorry. Your husband's body was recovered from the river this morning." Grace's scream tore through the apartment complex loud enough that 3 neighbors came running. No, that's not possible. He was here. He was just here." "Ma'am, we understand this is a shock. There will be a formal identification, but the wallet and identification found on the body—" "I don't care about a wallet. I need to see him." They wouldn't let her. "Water damage," they said.
Too far gone, they said. Closed casket, they said. Over and over. Like a chant meant to keep her from asking the questions that would have unraveled everything right then and there. She buried an empty casket 6 days later, 5 months pregnant, in a black dress that no longer fit right around her belly. Dean stood at the back of the church the entire service and left before the burial. Grace was too broken to notice. Comment below if you've ever lost someone and felt like the whole world just kept moving without you. Grace felt that, and it was about to get so much worse. Grief has a way of opening every door in a house you thought was locked. Within a month, the bills started arriving. Not the ordinary kind. Loan notices, collection letters, a certified envelope from a bank Grace had never even heard of, informing her that her husband had taken out a second mortgage on an apartment they didn't legally own, co-signed under a name that wasn't quite his, backed by documents with a signature that looked like Nathan's but wasn't. "Ma'am, I understand you're grieving," the bank representative said over the phone, her voice flat with practiced sympathy. "But the debt doesn't disappear because your husband passed. If you were listed on any of these accounts—" "I wasn't listed on anything. I didn't even know these accounts existed." "I understand that's difficult to hear." "Do you?" Grace's voice shook. "Do you understand that I buried my husband 3 weeks ago? That I am 5 months pregnant and sitting alone in an apartment I can't afford, being told I owe money for a house I've never even seen?" "Ma'am, I'm just doing my job." "Then do your job somewhere else," Grace snapped, and hung up before the woman could answer. It kept happening. Another call came 2 days later, this one from a collections agency representing an auto loan on a truck Grace had never once seen parked outside their apartment. "Mrs. Cole, we've made several attempts to reach your husband regarding a delinquent balance of $14,000. "My husband is dead." There was a pause on the line, the kind of pause that told Grace the woman on the other end had heard that sentence before and had a script ready for it, too. "I'm very sorry for your loss. Unfortunately, the debt is still active, and depending on how the account was structured, you may be held liable as—" "I was never on that loan. I never signed anything for a truck." "Do you have documentation confirming that, ma'am?" Grace didn't. That was the cruelest part. Somewhere, buried in paperwork she'd never seen, her name or a signature close enough to hers had been used to guarantee debts she never knew existed. She spent that entire week at the kitchen table with a legal pad, writing down every account, every dollar amount, every unfamiliar name attached to a life she thought she'd known completely. By the 4th week, the number in the corner of that legal pad had climbed past $90,000. She confronted the only person who might have answers. Dean didn't return her calls for 11 days. When he finally did, his voice was clipped and guarded, nothing like the easy charm she remembered from holiday dinners. "Grace, I really don't think I'm the right person to talk to about this." "You're exactly the right person, Dean. Your name is on half of these accounts. Look, whatever business Nathan and I had going, that was between us. I'm sorry for your loss, I really am, but I can't help you with the money side of things." "He's dead, Dean. Doesn't that scare you even a little? Doesn't it make you want to ask questions about how a man ends up drowning in a river 2 miles from where he was supposedly robbed?" The line went quiet for a long moment. "I have to go," Dean said, and hung up before she could say another word. Grace sat there with the dial tone humming in her ear, and for the first time, underneath all the grief, a small, sharp seed of suspicion took root. She didn't let herself look at it directly. Not yet. Grief was easier to sit with than the alternative. A car loan she didn't know about. A business loan tied to a shell company with Dean's name buried 3 layers deep in the paperwork. Grace sat at her kitchen table night after night with a shoebox full of documents she couldn't make sense of, and every single one of them chipped away another piece of the man she thought she'd married. The stress caught up with her body before her mind could even process it. One evening in her 7th month, she doubled over in the kitchen, pain tearing through her stomach like something was ripping loose inside her. She lost the baby that night, There is no gentle way to say it, and there wasn't a gentle way to live through it. Grace woke up in a hospital bed 3 days later, empty in every sense of the word, and the first thought that crossed her mind was not sadness. It was rage. Rage at Nathan for leaving her with a mess this big. Rage at herself for not asking harder questions. Rage even at God for the first time in her whole life. "Where were you?" she whispered to the ceiling of that hospital room. "I gave you everything. I trusted you with all of it. Where were you?" Nobody answered. Nobody ever does. Not right away. If you're getting angry right now, good, because you should be. Smash that like button and let me know in the comments if you think Grace deserved better, because she absolutely did, and it only gets worse from here. Subscribe now so you don't miss what she finds 2 years from now, because trust me, it changes everything. Her aunt found her one night sitting on the floor of the empty apartment, surrounded by unopened envelopes, and knelt down beside her without saying a word. "I don't know how to carry this," Grace whispered. "I don't know how to carry any of it."
"You don't have to carry it here," her aunt said, smoothing a hand over Grace's hair the way she had when Grace was a little girl. "Sometimes God doesn't ask us to carry the weight where it broke us. Sometimes he just asks us to walk far enough away to set it down." Grace thought about those words for a long time afterwards. She thought about them on the bus north. She thought about them the first night she slept in a town where nobody knew her name. She sold the flower shop within the year. Her aunt didn't want to let it go, but Grace insisted, needing every dollar to cover the debts that kept surfacing like bodies in a flood. She sold her wedding ring next, then the furniture. Then finally, she packed 2 suitcases, boarded a bus north, and left Chicago behind for a town she'd only ever seen in a photograph. Millbrook, Vermont, population under 3,000. A place where nobody knew her name, her husband's name, or the wreckage either name had left behind. She rented a small stand at the edge of the town square and started selling flowers again, because it was the only thing she still knew how to do with her hands. She used her mother's maiden name, Whitfield, and told anyone who asked that she was a widow starting over. It wasn't a lie. It just wasn't the whole truth. 2 years passed. Grace built something small but steady. She went to the local church on Sundays, sat in the back pew, and slowly, carefully, let herself believe in God's timing again. Not because the pain had gone away, but because she had run out of other things to believe in. There was one man in town who checked on her more than the others. Marcus Bennett, a detective with the county sheriff's department, had helped her get her flower stand's permit sorted in her first month in Millbrook. And somewhere along the way, it had turned into something quieter and steadier. He never pushed. He'd stop by on Friday afternoons for a bouquet he didn't need, and stay to talk for 20 minutes he didn't have to spare. "You don't have to keep buying flowers you don't need, Marcus," Grace told him once, half smiling for the first time in longer than she could remember. "Maybe I like the company," he said. She didn't let herself think too hard about what that meant. Not yet. Then, on a gray Tuesday morning in early spring, a moving truck pulled up outside the empty house next to Grace's rented cottage on Larkspur Lane. She watched from her kitchen window as a man climbed out of the driver's seat, stretched, and turned to survey the street. And Grace's coffee mug slipped straight out of her hand and shattered on the floor. He had the same jaw, the same build, the same scar over his left eyebrow, the one Nathan got as a boy falling off a bike, the one she used to trace with her thumb on quiet nights before everything fell apart. The man introduced himself to the neighborhood a few days later as Caleb Reyes, new in town, kept mostly to himself, worked some kind of remote job nobody could quite pin down. Grace told herself it was grief playing tricks. She told herself dead men do not move in next door with U-Hauls and new names. She told herself 100 things over the following weeks, and none of them stopped the feeling crawling up her spine every single time Caleb Reyes walked past her window and reached up, without thinking, to rub the same spot Nathan used to rub when he was nervous.
If you think you already know where this is going, drop a comment right now with your guess. I want to see how many of you figure it out before Grace does. And if this story has you hooked already, do not scroll past without hitting that subscribe button, because episode after episode, this only gets more intense. Grace started watching him. She hated herself for it, prayed about it, told herself she was being paranoid, and did it anyway. She watched the way he moved through his yard like a man who was used to being invisible. She watched the way he flinched at loud noises, the same way Nathan used to. She watched him step outside to take phone calls at odd hours, pacing the same nervous line back and forth across his porch that Nathan used to pace in a parking lot 2 states and 3 years away. One evening, she brought it to Marcus over coffee at the diner on Main Street, her hands wrapped so tight around the mug that her knuckles blanched white. "I know how this sounds," she said. "Try me." "My husband is dead, Marcus. I buried him. I have the paperwork. I have the death certificate. And there is a man living next door to me who has his exact face." Marcus set his coffee down slowly. "Grace, grief does strange things to the mind. I've seen it before. People see the person they lost everywhere, in strangers, in crowds." "This isn't that," Grace snapped, sharper than she meant to. "I know what I saw. I know his scar. I know the way he touches it. Marcus, I need you to believe me." Marcus studied her for a long moment, and something in his expression shifted from gentle concern into something more focused, more careful. "Give me a few days," he said. "Let me look into a few things quietly. I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm saying let's find out before you confront anyone. A few days," Grace repeated. "I promise. I'll run his name, check the moving records, and see who owns that house. If something's wrong, we'll find it the right way, not the way that gets you hurt."
Grace nodded, but the promise sat uneasily in her stomach the rest of that night. She barely slept. Every creak of the house, every set of headlights sweeping past her window sent her heart slamming against her ribs. 2 nights later, she saw him again. Caleb Reyes stood in his driveway at nearly midnight, phone pressed to his ear, pacing in that same nervous line she'd watched Nathan walk 100 times outside their old apartment. She crept closer to her window, straining to hear. "I told you not to call me here," he was saying, voice low, sharp with something close to panic. "This isn't the arrangement we had, Dean. You said 6 months. It's been 2 years. Grace's hand flew to her mouth. "Dean." She hadn't imagined it. She hadn't misheard a stranger's voice carry oddly on the wind. That name, the one that had haunted every collections call, every unanswered question, every sleepless night for 2 straight years, had just come out of a dead man's mouth, 50 feet from her bedroom window. She didn't call Marcus that night. She told herself she would, first thing in the morning, and she believed it when she said it. But morning came, and with it came doubt, the old familiar kind that had kept her quiet for years before. What if she'd misheard? What if grief really was rewriting her memory the way Marcus had gently suggested? What if she confronted a stranger and ruined a decent man's life over a scar and a name that 1,000 other people might share? She didn't call Marcus. Not that day, and not the day after. By the 3rd night, she couldn't stand it anymore. 3 nights later, unable to sleep, unable to pray the feeling away, she pulled on a coat over her nightgown and walked the 50 feet between her cottage and Caleb Reyes' front door. She knocked before she let herself think better of it. The porch light flicked on. Footsteps approached. The door opened.
Comment right now if your heart is racing, because mine is just writing this. Before we go any further, make sure you've hit subscribe, because the next part of this story is the confrontation you have been waiting for since the very first second I said his name. The man in the doorway went pale the moment he saw her face. Grace. Not a question. Her name, spoken with the exact weight and cadence of a man who had said it every single night for 2 years of marriage. "Nathan," she breathed, and the world tilted sideways beneath her feet. "Grace, listen to me. You don't understand." "Understand what?" Her voice climbed, cracking apart at the edges. Understand that I buried you? That I planned a funeral for an empty casket? That I lost our baby crying over debts you left me with? Understand what, Nathan? Keep your voice down. No, I will not keep my voice down. I have spent 2 years believing I was going crazy, and you have been living 50 feet from my house under a fake name. Nathan stepped back, letting the door swing wider, his hands raised like he was trying to calm a spooked animal instead of the woman he'd once promised his whole life to. It wasn't supposed to happen like this, he said. You weren't supposed to end up here. Millbrook was a coincidence. I swear to you, I didn't know. A coincidence. Grace laughed, and it came out broken and wrong. You faked your death, Nathan. You let me bury you. Was that a coincidence, too? He didn't answer right away, and in the silence, Grace felt something in her chest turn to ice. Say it, she said. Say it out loud. I need to hear you say it. Nathan's jaw tightened. His eyes darted past her toward the street, toward the dark, like he was checking whether anyone else could hear.
Dean and I owed people money, he said finally, quietly. Real money. Dangerous money. The kind of debt where they don't send you a letter, they send someone to your door. We were in too deep, Grace. Business loans that went bad, investments Dean talked me into, and by the time I told you any of it, it would have already been too late for both of us. So you let them think you were dead? You don't understand what it's like, Nathan said, his voice rising now, some of the old smoothness cracking away to reveal something raw underneath. You don't understand what it's like to owe men money who don't care about grace periods or payment plans. Men who send pictures of your house to your phone just to remind you they know where you sleep. So you left me in that house instead? I thought I was protecting you. By letting me bury you? By letting me stand at your grave 5 months pregnant, telling our unborn child that their father was a hero who died protecting what was ours? You didn't protect me, Nathan. You used me. You used my grief as a shield so you could disappear clean.
Nathan flinched like she'd struck him. That's not fair. Fair? Grace laughed again, sharper this time, an edge to it that frightened even her. You want to talk to me about fair? I sold my wedding ring to pay debts you racked up under my name. I sold my aunt's flower shop. I watched my own body fail because the stress of your lies was too much for it to carry. And you were standing here, in a house you're renting under a name that isn't yours, telling me about fair? We staged it, Nathan said, quieter now, some of the fight draining out of his voice. Dean knew a man. It wasn't supposed to be permanent. It was supposed to buy me time to clear the debt from a distance. Pay it down quietly and then, I don't know, disappear somewhere new and start over. I never planned on staying gone forever. You never planned on telling me the truth, you mean? I couldn't. If you'd known, if anyone had known, it wouldn't have worked. I had to let you believe it. All of you. My mother, your family, everyone. I was pregnant, Nathan. The words tore out of her, raw and furious, and for the first time, Nathan's composure cracked all the way through. I didn't know that would happen, he said, his voice breaking. I didn't know about the baby. I didn't know you'd lose everything. I didn't know any of it would go this far. You didn't know because you weren't there. You made sure of that.
Headlights swept across the front of the house as a car pulled up fast along the curb. Grace turned, chest heaving, and saw Marcus stepping out, one hand resting near his hip, his eyes moving quickly between her and the man standing in the doorway. Grace, step back, Marcus said, voice low and steady, all business now. Step back toward me. Marcus. Now, Grace. She moved. Her legs carried her backwards on instinct, even as her eyes stayed locked on Nathan's face, on the scar, on the man who was supposed to be 6 feet under, and instead was standing in a doorway in Vermont with 2 years of lies stacked up behind his eyes. Nathan Cole, Marcus said, stepping forward, badge already out.
I've got a federal fraud investigation with your name on it. Insurance fraud, falsified death records, and about half a dozen loans taken out under forged signatures. You want to tell me how a dead man's been paying rent for the past 8 months? Nathan's shoulders sagged, all the fight going out of him at once, like a rope finally cut. I was going to make it right, he said quietly. I swear to God I was going to make it right. Tell it to a judge, Marcus said, and reached for the cuffs at his belt. If your jaw is on the floor right now, comment the word betrayed, because that is exactly what Grace is feeling in this moment. Do not go anywhere, because what happens next determines everything for both of them, and you will want to see how this story ends. Nathan didn't resist. He stood there, on his own porch, wrists out, eyes fixed somewhere over Grace's shoulder, unable to look at her directly. For what it's worth, he said, as Marcus clicked the cuffs into place. I never stopped loving you. I was just too much of a coward to face what loving you honestly would have cost me. Grace stared at him, and for one long moment, standing in the cold with her nightgown soaked through from the rain that had started falling somewhere in the middle of everything, she felt the strangest thing. Not hatred, not even rage anymore.
Just grief. A clean, final kind of grief. The kind that comes when you finally stop waiting for someone to become the person you always hoped they were. I hope it was worth it, she said quietly. I hope whatever you were running from was worth everything you took from me. She turned and walked back toward her own front door without waiting for an answer. The weeks that followed moved slower than Grace expected. Nathan was formally charged in a courtroom 2 hours away. Insurance fraud, identity falsification, obstruction, and a list of charges that took the judge nearly 10 minutes to read aloud. Dean was arrested a week later in another state, having fled the moment he heard Nathan had been found. Grace sat in the courtroom gallery on the day of sentencing, hands folded in her lap, and watched the man she had once married stand and finally, publicly, confess to every single thing he had done. The prosecutor read the charges one by one, and with each one, Grace felt something in her chest settle a little further, like a house finally finding level ground after years of standing crooked. Insurance fraud, falsification of public records, identity misrepresentation, obstruction. The words meant nothing and everything at once. Cold legal language standing in for 2 years of her life she would never get back. Dean's sentencing had happened the week before, in a different courtroom 2 counties over. Grace hadn't gone. She didn't need to see his face to know what he'd taken from her. Nathan's face was enough of a mirror for both of them. The judge, a stern woman with silver hair pulled back tight, looked over her glasses at Nathan for a long moment before speaking.
Mr. Cole, in 22 years on this bench, I have seen a great many people stand before me and try to explain away their choices. Very few of them have caused this particular kind of harm. You didn't just defraud financial institutions. You orchestrated the psychological torment of a grieving widow for your own convenience, and you allowed her to carry that grief publicly while you lived 50 miles away under a new name. Do you have anything to say before I pass the sentence? Nathan stood slowly, his hands folded in front of him, and for the first time in longer than Grace could remember, he looked directly at her. I let fear make my decisions, Nathan told the judge, his voice hollow but steady. I let it convince me that hiding was easier than the truth. I have no excuse for what that cost my wife. I am not asking for forgiveness. I know I don't deserve it. I am only asking to finally be held accountable for choosing everything except the people who trusted me. Grace didn't cry. She had cried enough for one lifetime already. She simply listened. And when the judge read the sentence, she felt something in her chest finally, quietly, unclench. It wasn't relief exactly. It was closure. And closure, she was learning, could be its own kind of mercy. Marcus drove her home that evening. Neither of them spoke much on the 2-hour drive back to Millbrook. The radio low, the fields outside dark and endless. When he pulled up in front of her cottage, he didn't get out right away. You did the hard part, he said. You faced it
instead of running. I didn't have much choice. You always have a choice, Grace. You chose the harder one. That matters.
She looked at him for a long moment, this steady, patient man who had shown up for her every single week for 2 years without ever once asking for anything in return. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Anything." "Why did you never say anything? All those Fridays, all those bouquets you didn't need? Why did you just wait?" Marcus considered the question like he'd been carrying the answer around for a while, waiting for the right moment to set it down. "Because you just buried a man you thought was your whole world," he said. "It wasn't my place to ask you to see me while you were still learning how to see yourself again. I figured if it was supposed to happen, it would happen on its own time, not mine." Grace felt something in her chest loosen at that, some final knot she hadn't realized she'd still been carrying. That sounds a lot like something I would have said, back before I knew better. "Maybe some of it rubbed off on me," Marcus said, and there was a smile in his voice, even though the porch light was too dim to see it clearly. "Come inside," she said. "I'll make coffee." He smiled, small and real. "You don't have to keep making excuses to have me around, you know?" "Maybe I like the company," Grace said, echoing his own words back to him. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, she meant it without an ounce of fear attached to the feeling. They sat on her porch that night long after the coffee went cold, talking about nothing important. And Grace found herself thinking, for the first time in years, that maybe God's timing hadn't failed her after all. Maybe it had simply been patient with her, waiting for her to stop running toward the easy answer and start trusting the slower, truer one. She thought about the version of herself who had waited so long for a sign, who had let a good man's charm stand in for the discernment she should have trusted from the very beginning. She wasn't angry at that version of herself anymore. She understood her. She had simply needed to learn, the hardest way possible, that faith was never meant to replace wisdom. It was meant to walk beside it. She thought about all the women who might be sitting somewhere tonight, ignoring the same quiet warning she had once ignored, mistaking a partner's silence for strength instead of what it so often really was, a door quietly closing on the truth. She hoped if any of them were listening, that they would trust the unease in their own chest a little sooner than she had trusted hers. "I should have put God first," Grace thought later that night, staring up at a ceiling that finally felt like it belonged to a home instead of a hiding place. Not instead of trusting a man, instead of ignoring everything he was already trying to show me. She thought too about the flower stand waiting for her in the morning, about the buckets of fresh stems she'd need to cut before the town square filled with its usual Saturday crowd, about the ordinary, unremarkable rhythm of a life that finally belonged entirely to her. There was no dramatic reversal in the weeks that followed, no sudden windfall or grand gesture to erase everything that had come before it. Grace still carried scars from the years she'd lost, the child she never got to hold, and the trust she'd handed to a man who hadn't earned it. But she carried them differently now, not as wounds she was still bleeding from, but as proof of everything she'd survived to get here. Marcus stayed that night longer than either of them expected, and when he finally stood to leave, he paused at the door the way he always did, like he was giving her one more chance to change her mind about letting him in. "Same time next Friday?" he asked. "You don't have to ask anymore," Grace said. "You're always welcome." She fell asleep with that thought settled quietly in her chest, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, she did not wake up afraid of what the morning might bring. If this story hit you the way it hit me writing it, make sure you like this video, drop a comment telling me what part affected you the most, and subscribe so you never miss the next story. There are so many more just like Grace's waiting for you, and trust me, you will not want to miss a single one.